Good evening. Welcome to the Community Awareness Committee's May panel discussion. Our topic this evening is mental health. I am Trish Steiner, Chair of the Community Awareness Committee. We are a committee of the Neighborhood Safety Commission. The Neighborhood Safety Commission is comprised of individuals appointed by the chairman and the district commissioners. We welcome you and thank you for attending this evening, and welcome those of you who are watching on TV 23. Our committee members are Joel Cope, Vicki Plunkett, and Pearl Roberts. We have file cards available for written questions. Vicki and I will be available to take your written questions. Please turn your cell phones off or on silent, as your phone will interfere with the broadcasting of this discussion. Our moderator this evening is Joel Cope. Joel is an attorney whose practices in trial litigation, and he has been practicing attorney for 18 years. He currently serves on the Neighborhood Safety Commission and served as its chair for one term. He serves as the president of the Mableton Improvement Coalition and president of the Mableton Community Fund. He also served as secretary and president of his HOA and was appointed by the Pass County Commissioner Chairman to serve as a member of the Transit Authority Board, eventually obtaining the position of this board's vice chairmanship. We especially want to thank Joel for being our phenomenal moderator this evening, and Joel will now introduce our distinguished panel members to you. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Joel Cope, and I will be the moderator for this evening's panel discussion. And I want to thank Trish and the other members of our Neighborhood Safety Commission, as well as our panelists, for having come here tonight. For the folks who have not seen our town halls prior to now, there is both a live audience as well as an audience online as well as on television. And we have received questions that are to be used for tonight's panel discussion, which, as Trish stated, is related to mental health, and it's only appropriate since it is Mental Health Awareness Month. We've had a series of these discussions on a variety of topics relating to public safety over the course of the last few months, and this particular topic, as you heard earlier, is mental health. And so I want to thank each of our panelists for their participation in tonight's panel. I think this is going to be a great panel discussion. The way this works, for people who have not had a chance to see this discussion before, is I do a brief introduction, and then we have each panelist introduce himself or herself a little more thoroughly to our audience, so the audience will know what the person's expertise is or what their life experience is, and then we will go into a Q&A session. The questions have been submitted to us previously, but again, our members of the live audience can certainly submit other questions to us as we go along, things that may occur to you as you hear the panelists comment and provide their information. And it'll be a Q&A format where we basically have all the questions come through myself, hence my moderator title, and then we'll have a Q&A that is addressed to each of the panelists. Some of the questions will be unique to you because of the topic matter, but other questions are intended to be for the entire group on the panel, and we would love to have each one of you weigh in as much or as little as you'd like to each question that's being posed to you at the time. In no particular order, here are our panelists. We have Neil Blake, who is the president of the Cobb County affiliate of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI-COB. We have Lieutenant Becky Westenberger, who has worked for the Cobb County Sheriff's Department since May of 1997 and has worked her way through the ranks, where she currently holds the rank of lieutenant. We have Judge Kelly Wolk, who is currently serving as the probate court judge for Cobb County. We have Kimberly Schwartz, who is the prosecutor for the accountability courts in the district attorney's office of the Cobb Judicial Circuit. And we have Todd Citron, who is the CEO of the Cobb Douglas Community Service Board, which is a 400-employee hybrid public-private behavioral health care and developmental disability provider. And we have Ramona Charles, who is a consumer and who was kind enough to share her life experience with us today. Again, for our audience, each panelist will have more time to introduce himself or herself to you. But again, I want to explain to you who each individual was, and we're again very fortunate to have them with us tonight. I'd like to turn to you, Ms. Schwartz, just to pick on you since you are the one to my left, immediate left. If you would kindly introduce yourself to the audience and sort of tell them about your expertise and your background.
Sure. My name is Kim Schwartz. I work for District Attorney Vic Reynolds. And when he came into office, we already had a drug treatment court, but he decided to also work alongside Judge Mary Staley, who for a long time had wanted to have a mental health court. And we established the mental health court in March of 2013, and we established a veterans court in June of 2014. So we actually have 3 accountability courts now, and I work with all of those. And so I've been working with the mental health program since November. My background, I've been a prosecutor about half my legal career in Bartow County and with the Georgia Attorney General's office. And I've also done some civil work with the Georgia Attorney General's office and with a private firm, Crimin Bassler, here in Cobb County.
Wonderful. Thank you. Mr. Citron?
Thank you. I'm Todd Citron. I'm the Executive Director of the Cobb and Douglas Community Service Boards. And we are a quasi-governmental entity. We're a public corporation subunit of state government. And we're the safety net provider of mental health, addiction, and developmental disability services for the two counties. We serve about 14,000 people a year in a whole variety of different what's called community-based services. So we have outpatient centers, we have residential programs, we have intensive case management services, an assertive community treatment program, which is like the most intensive level of case management. We have crisis services, everything to a locked unit. And we serve, it's about 14,000 a year, 10,000 in community-based services, and then also we serve about another 4,000 in the Cobb County Jail. 400 employees spread out over 45 different locations. We are in the process right now of building a brand new 20,000 square foot behavioral health crisis service center, which is sitting on County Services Parkway. It's going up right across from the jail, and the goal is that will be utilized for diversion away from incarceration or all this emergency room buildup where you have folks who crash land who have psychiatric issues in the ER. And we're hoping that they will be diverted to this center for more better appropriate use of community services. So.
Thank you. Judge Wolk?
I'm not nearly as interesting as they are. I am Kelly Wolk. I am the probate judge here in Cobb County. I started out as the law clerk to then probate judge Dodd in the Cobb County Probate Court and went into private practice doing probate litigation. And then I got elected and went back across the street to work in the probate court of Cobb County. So I'm sort of a one-trick pony. I'm not nearly as well-rounded as you are. And we have a couple of divisions in our office. One of those divisions, our estate division, works extensively with guardianships, mental health issues, what we call orders to apprehend, what some folks call 1013s, what some people call emergency pickup orders. They are sort of have a number of nicknames in the vernacular. And so we have a pretty consistent outreach to the mental health community through those things in our court.
Okay. I will say it's funny, in your bio, you did mention you have a wonderful husband and a perfect dog. Did you mean to switch those adjectives up?
And I know I'm on television and he would agree. He is wonderful, though.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Blake?
Yes, I'm Neil Blake, and I've been the president of NAMI Cobb for the last 2 years. NAMI stands for the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and we're a grassroots advocacy organization. We provide free support groups and education classes for individuals living with mental illness as well as their family and friends.
Wonderful. Thank you. Lieutenant Westenberger?
Yes, sir. My name is Lieutenant Becky Westenberger. I stated previously, I do work for Cobb County Sheriff's Office. I've been employed with the Sheriff's Office, just turned 18 years, and I have worked my way up through the ranks. So I've various experience all the way from working in the detention facility, court security. I had the opportunity to work internal affairs, public outreach, where I could go into the schools and talk to children about the effects of drugs and alcohol, making the right choices. The Warrant Division, Field Operations, and I'm currently the lieutenant over the Sheriff's Office Training Unit, as well as an adjunct instructor at North Central Georgia Law Enforcement Academy.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Charles?
I'm Ramona Charles, and I have been a part of NAMI for about 4 or 5 years now. I work for I volunteer actually for the In Our Own Voice program as well as for the consumer support groups. My background, I graduated with a degree in psychology, and right now I work for Peachford Hospital as a mental health technician.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much. It may help some people to kind of have some definitions made for them before we get our discussion started, so that way people don't wonder what things mean. It might be useful to actually define what is a mental health condition or a mental illness. I'd be interested in hearing each one of the panelists introduce that concept to our listening audience. Ms. Schwartz.
Right. I probably don't have the clinical background that some of the other panelists do, but I know when we screen someone to participate in the mental health court, what we're looking for is we try to see if they have a severe and persistent mental illness that we feel like is either caused or contributed to criminal behavior. So I do sort of a screening on the case to see if I think it's appropriate to be passed on to our team, but I really rely on the whole mental health court team to bring all the information to the table so that we can make a good decision. And part of that is our teammates that work for the Cobb Community Services Board will either go out to the jail or they will go out and meet with the person in the community, and they will do a mental health assessment of them. They will see if this is somebody that's previously been diagnosed or maybe got diagnosed in the jail. We also get information from anybody that helped treat any mental health condition in the jail. So we feel like by the time we hear from them and from our sheriff's department and the various members of the table, we get a good picture of what their clinical background is and the current legal situation that they're in.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, so we as a provider, that's one of the main things we do is we treat folks who come to us who have some sort of symptoms that demonstrate they have a mental illness. And to access our services, they have to have an assessment. So, and then a diagnosis of some sort of mental health sort of problem. So things you might hear about for people who suffer from depression or bipolar disorder, or people who have like thought disorders or psychoses, those are mental health issues, but they're also a medical diagnosis. So anyone who we serve they receive an assessment. They may or may not get services from a psychiatrist for like medication management. They'll get different sorts of therapies associated with, as a treatment modality associated with whatever issues, whatever they're struggling with. So they'll have some sort of treatment plan. Anyone who we serve, they will have a diagnosis. So she talked about people who we interface with between our two organizations, like through the mental health court. And these are folks who kind of go in and out of the jail, and their disease is pretty intense, as like she said, a severe and persistent mental illness, and they kind of cycle in and out of the jail. And one of our goals in the partnership with the mental health court is that these folks are maintained safely in the community under Judge Staley's watch, and then we are a treatment provider, so we wrap them with what's called wraparound supports like case management, make sure they see their physician, their psychiatrist for medication management, but it all circles back that they have some sort of mental health presentation that's diagnosed, and it's usually pretty severe by the time they come to us. And we will tend to work with people there's a high uninsured population in Cobb County. That's our population we work with, the working poor, or folks who have like a severe and persistent mental illness.
Thank you.
I'm a lawyer. I'm not a doctor. I'm the daughter of a social worker, so I consider myself fully trained. But we typically rely on reports either from family in some of our proceedings or from doctors, psychologists, or licensed clinical social worker affidavits in support of certain kinds of petitions that give us a diagnostic history. So if we see a diagnosis of mental illness generically, or psychosis, or various bipolar type things, it's not so much that we define mental illness, it's that the professionals and or the family members who are interfacing with the professionals are telling us that there's a history of mental illness that triggers some other things in our procedures.
Yeah, I think I would add that mental illnesses are biological brain disorders. They are an illness like any other illness, but it's also an illness unlike any other, and that a mental illness hijacks the person's brain. It's the brain that's affected, and it affects the ability to think and their mood, their ability to relate to others. So it's different. And it is, as my experience is as a family member. So that is the only credential I've got, is that I have a son with a serious and persistent mental illness.
I would have to agree with what Neil said. It is a illness that it took me a while to learn about. I had the opportunity back in 2009 in attending a crisis intervention training course. And in that course, it took me a while to accept that mental illness is an illness, just like cancer, just like diabetes, and again, unlike all those those illnesses, unto its own. I think as far as law enforcement role, a lot of our law enforcement officers do not have the training on dealing with someone or communicating with someone who has a mental illness. And my job right now, I'm very instrumental in supporting and conducting CIT classes for law enforcement officers. I really have a strong desire to hopefully get as many officers as we can trained so that when they go out and they are the first responder to houses, businesses, establishments, et cetera, that they see these symptoms that are somewhat out of the norm and in coming into daily contact with individuals, and they can say, okay, well, there might be an issue here. And hopefully, instead of just, cuffing them and taking them to a detention facility, we can now utilize the diversion center and hopefully divert them so that not everybody who has a mental illness or comes in contact with law enforcement is taken into custody. Now, there are some instances where they have to be taken into custody, but not every single time. It's just hopefully a bridge of communication there that I can help hopefully educate the law enforcement officers in Cobb County in taking some of the classes and opening eyes for them, just like my eyes were open.
Ms. Charles?
I agree with you because in our own voice program that I would go speak to some populations such as the police officers who are doing the CIT training. And I think it's beneficial for the community to be aware of the mental health issues that are plaguing our families, that are plaguing our friends, our communities, our loved ones, period. For myself, I've been diagnosed with major depression for 7 years now. And, I go to treatment. I go to therapy. I also facilitate groups, and I'm a functional part of my community. However, like you guys said, it is one of those things that hijacks your mind. It hijacks your mind and takes over. And at certain times, the illness can shut your whole system down. So in those times, there are certain things that can happen to the person where they may do criminal activities. They may do things that are out of the norm for them, period. I know for myself, out of the norm would be not working or not doing the things that I would normally do with my friends or my family. So I do think, and I do honestly feel a very, very great passion for people such as our law enforcement and our judges and lawyers and everything to have an awareness of that mental health, have an awareness that, like you said, it's an illness like no other. And then again, it is an illness like just, it's extraordinary. So, dealing with this every day, dealing with this cycle personally, I definitely have that passion for the community to have more of an awareness for that.
Again, getting into this definition of mental illness, if you have a coworker, for example, who works in a setting, either in a cubicle or in an office, and this person goes regularly to see a therapist for depression, is that person considered to be someone with a mental health condition? Or does it have to be like what you see on the media, where it's some kind of wild and extreme behavior in order to reach the level of being mentally ill, so to speak?
So hopefully it's not that, but the media will you see a lot of stigma associated with folks who have mental health issues. And so that's a representation that gets really overblown. So, your example of someone who works in an office who has depression they're viewed in the minority, whereas these high-profile media cases where someone who is sick, who's fallen through the cracks, and then we have a bad shoot-up is what the public starts to associate with mental illness. And it really is, it's crippling for what all of us are trying to achieve, the importance of doing an event like this where you're educating the public about mental illness on Mental Health Awareness Month. But the stereotypes they're frightening, and they're also crippling, because you speak openly about your lived experience. And the state of Georgia has been a leader in regard to what's called the recovery movement. We are amongst the worst per capita funded states in the country for mental health funding. And we're a large state now. We're the eighth or ninth largest state in the country. And we're like 48th or 49th in per capita funding. So we got lots of people who have mental health problems who kind of slip through the cracks. But we are just renowned in regards to our peer recovery programs, like the best in the country. The Georgia Mental Health Consumer Network, the Georgia Council on Substance Abuse. We have certifications for folks who have lived experience. We were the first state in the country. We're certified peer specialists, and on the recovery coach side for people who have addictions, It's called the Certified Addiction Recovery Empowerment Specialist. CARES is the acronym, but it's people who have lived experience, they're in recovery, and they are providers. They end up becoming providers. And our state was the first state in the country where certified peer specialists provided Medicaid billable services. So, but you know, these are good exercise to educate the public around, you know, so that we can destigmatize mental illness, and that what gets blown out in the media with these kind of horrifying situations, which are in the vast majority, which make people who have a mental illness appear that they can become deranged, which is inappropriate, but which scares the general population.
Well, and to that point, actually, what is the ratio of people in American society who are estimated to have a mental health condition? What are the numbers you've heard as far as, is it 1 in 10, 1 in 6, 1 in 20? What numbers are we hearing?
1 in 4.
1 in 4. So that's 25%.
And that's just if I'm not mistaken, that's just in the state of Georgia. 1 in 4 in the state of Georgia.
Well, that's too also those people who actually are willing to admit and actually speak up about it because, you know, like you said, I mean, just as the question was, now that I am open and sharing it with coworkers and friends, they all look at me like, I didn't know you had depression, or I can't tell you have any kind of thing wrong with you. And it's not something that I'm like, yeah, I'm, you know, this crazy person that you see on TV. No, I just deal with an illness just as though somebody is going to the hospital and getting treated for cancer or diabetes. So, you know, yes, it is something that a lot of people will not admit to because of the stereotype. We did a documentary about 3 years ago now that did talk about that as well. And it was around the time that the young man had entered the movie theater. And they were kind of looking at mental illness as though, okay, this is what happens. Well, that's an extreme that happens. You know, for myself personally, I'm not that extreme. And, you know, I deal with my own issues. I live with it. I go through it. I function with it. So, yes, the media does portray us in an extreme fashion. So there are programs, like you said, that are in place, which I'm very proud to be part of NAMI that does that, you know, so that we can start reducing that stigma, so that people can start speaking up and say, hey, this is what's going on with me, and they can get the treatment and the care that they need.
I guess, I'm sorry.
And as a prosecutor, I think we really see it as a public safety issue. We feel like we're contributing to public safety by having a mental health court program, because if we can have people voluntarily in treatment and people complying with their medication, then we're not going to have violent incidents. We're not going to be on the news. You know, it's going to take us a while, I think, to get the hard numbers on how we're able to reduce recidivism through our programs. But I think we're going to see that as we see people not have new incidents because they are in treatment.
I think you kind of touched upon this earlier, but I know a lot of conditions have kind of come out of the shadows, so to speak, and people now freely step up and admit they have, you know, fill in the blank, that condition. Do you think that we're in that place in our society with mental illness, or is there still a strong stigma attached to mental illness?
I think both. I think both of those. There is a stigma attached to it. In the African American community, I know there's a stigma attached in the religious settings, period. There's a big stigma attached with it because a few of my friends actually have been through situations where their family or their church support system, you know, thought, okay, well, they might be demon possessed or, you know, something to that nature. So in different cultures, there is still a big stereotype. There is a big stigma attached to it. But we are coming into a society where a lot of that is being lessened. A lot of that is being, you know, admonished and looked at, okay, hey, there is a problem. So I think it's a balance of both.
I think it's a little more still leaning towards stigma. And again, with the media, I really feel like with the movies and what's on television, it really pushes it to a far extreme. And granted, yes, it can be very minor to just someone being depressed to someone what we would consider and stereotype a maniac. And I think with just watching the media, whether it be television, whether it be the movies, and people not understanding and people not educated, I think when they hear somebody going through depression, or, you know, somebody sitting next to you in the cubicle, they just go to that automatic extreme. Well, one day I'm going to come in here and that person's going to act out and start screaming, and what's going to happen? So they shun themselves away from that individual instead of trying to get to know them as a person and trying to learn more about mental illness. And I really think it's a group effort. I mean, one thing that I've really learned in teaching the CIT class is that it takes a group effort. It takes family members. It takes, you know, the community. It takes the church faith-based community. It takes law enforcement, and it takes everybody to become educated and working together in helping this person when they are in the middle of a crisis or when they have a situation going on. So that's, you know, that's one reason why I'm very strong in you know, hopefully getting the law enforcement officers trained in the county that, you know, again, when they go out on the scene, they can work with the family and they can utilize the resources that we have here in Cobb County and make the most of it and hopefully help that individual out. And then, of course, in turn, through the mental health court, it builds a rapport. These individuals, the consumers, realize, you know what, law enforcement's not all about going out there and hurting me, and law enforcement's not about taking me to jail all the time. Law enforcement really, you know, they're here to protect and serve as the motto of law enforcement. And so I really feel like it takes a community. It takes everybody in the community to become educated and working together and trying to, you know, combat this and assist the consumer in providing them the resources.
Well, and it's a great lead-in. I mean, obviously we've been using the word consumer, and I know that terms often mean a lot. Is this a term that we should be using to describe people with a mental health condition? Is consumer the right word? I mean, I know we've been struggling with the right term, but is that the right term now?
Well, you know, that's a kind of an ongoing topic of discussion and debate. And I think the consumer, you know, there is a consumer movement, but just the term consumer, which has been used in our state now for a number of years. And it was built out of a reform initiative going back to 1994 to make the public mental health system much more friendly service-wise to the clients who are utilizing services. So it was under the guise of a reform initiative. It was House Bill 100 back in 1994, but the goal was that the system wasn't responsive and had to operate more friendly to its clients and people who were entering service, to treat them more like customers versus that these were state agencies and they could be inefficient and bureaucratic. So that was where the consumer movement was kind of was driven from, and it goes back a couple, you know, over 20 years. So the term gets thrown around kind of loosely. There's some folks who feel passionately about it, that it's, you know, consumer is a good word for people who are trying to access service and they're treated like customers. And then some folks look at it that it's a little stigmatizing, that we're not talking about people who are going in for cardiac treatment or diabetes as consumers, they're patients. So so it is kind of it is an interesting use of a word, and there's some in favor of it and some that see that it's kind of an outdated way of looking at clients who need a responsive system and need their needs met. So.
All right. Well, Ms. Charles, I mean, do you find that that'd be a good term, or is there a term you prefer that people use in common parlance?
You know what, to be honest, I'm sitting here thinking about it and I'm listening to your response, and I'd rather be called a consumer, a mental health consumer, than the depressive or the mental health person or the patient, because I'm not a patient. I mean, I go to get my therapy, I go to the psychiatrist and get my, you know, medications when I need to, but I'm not. I guess because I work in an inpatient setting, there is a distinction between, you know, being a patient and not. So no, I actually do appreciate the term consumer rather than, I'm not sure what else we would consider ourselves. And, you know, because you would have to break it down. I mean, like you have the diabetics or, you know, the cancer patients. What would you say? You would say the maniacs, you know, so I do like that term. It does feel a little more inviting. It does feel a little more, you know, welcoming to have, you know, your patients or your outpatients or whoever come in under that term so that they can feel comfortable getting that help and attention. So.
How do you think we can, as a society, go about kind of getting some words to be retired from our lexicon? I think we all could think easily of some terms that used to be freely used in public discourse that now, thanks to social media and changing mores, have been completely banished, and whoever uses those words now faces a great deal of opprobrium. How can you go about doing that for terms relating to people who have a mental health condition? What's the best way we can do that as a society?
Keep using other words. One of my tasks is I deal with firearms, and one of the terms that has consistently disgusted me is one of the federal disqualifiers for a firearms license is if you have been deemed to be a mental defective. And the fact that that's still part of the vernacular of a federal program and a federal disqualifier, to me, to have to put that in orders that someone has been deemed that by having a guardianship entered or being involuntarily committed to a mental facility or drug or alcohol rehab, to me is abhorrent. and I don't have any choice but to use that phrase because that's the legal term. But if people keep saying, I'm going to call myself a consumer, I'm not going to call myself a patient, and I'm not going to call myself a maniac, or, then it will hopefully gain some traction. But I think all words that are used to describe something that people feel is uncomfortable eventually attach to that and develop some kind of discomfort. So you sort of have this evolving set of words, but some are just really not okay.
I think the important thing is to just treat each person with respect and dignity. I think in the mental health court we try to separate the person from their behavior because obviously they've committed some type of felony behavior to even be in our program, but that doesn't mean that they're not a valuable person and that we can't separate those actions and we try to kind of sort out, why did this happen? What led up to this event? And what I've found is I've been impressed with the community support that we have gotten, and we've realized we're not just dealing with somebody going to their intensive case management. We're also dealing with, do they have housing? Do they have transportation? Do they have a supportive, do they have a support system in the community? There are a lot of practical needs, I think, that you can help people with that helps them in their long-term recovery.
Well, that's a great point you bring up, Ms. Schwartz. I think a lot of times people do struggle with how do you identify what portion of a person's outward behaviors are that person's unique personality versus how much might be attributed to the mental health condition. How do you or the other members of the panel, how do you sort of help figure those lines out? I know it's not an exact science, but how does one do that?
It's really not an exact science. And I really hate to give this as an example, but a few weeks ago I had a bad run-in with a coworker, and I am just the same every day. I'm this every day. So I really try to hone in on my patience and my happiness. And with this particular coworker, it was just, they just kept perpetuating the situation, and I just exploded, and I don't normally do that, and I found myself yelling and cursing, and that's not me. And it wasn't due to mental illness, it wasn't due to I didn't take my meds or anything. It was a human response. But as the situation started traveling around the hospital, there were a couple people who were close to me who, had went and told that other coworker, oh, it's okay, Ramona just didn't take her meds. And it kind of made me feel like we who are consumers, we live under this shell now where we are not allowed to act normally. So there is still that thin line of, are these behaviors normal as a human being, or are these under the guise of mental illness? I saw that as being, and I thought about what I was doing first, I saw that as being a natural response to a situation where somebody is agitating you. So now it's like I do live with that daily question of, okay, is my response or is my action going to be because of my depression or because of my, OCD or whatever the case may be, or is it because I am just naturally sad about whatever situation, or I'm just naturally angry, or you have really ticked me off. So there is a thin line between that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. You must have said everything needs to be said on the subject. You were that eloquent. Well, I do want to kind of ask you, I mean, you've touched upon some of these things, Ms. Charles, earlier, but what are some things that you wish people would know about what it is to have your life experience, that people, either misconceptions that they may have about your journey? I mean, what are some things you'd like people to know?
You guys touched on it earlier, where it's a great thing for people to just get to know a person for who they are. When we have family members and friends who have, cancer or any other kind of illness, we get to know that person. We have feelings for that person, and we, are apathetic for that person. But with mental illness, like you said, sometimes it's just a way to shun that person and kind of block them out because of it, because we don't understand it. But I think that the reality of the situation is that we really need to get to know the people around us. There are a lot more family members and friends who are struggling with, mental health issues that we may look at as, they're crazy or, and that's a term that we use sometimes. And I've had a lot of people say, no, don't use that word. That doesn't describe me. Well, for myself, like I said, I'm just now starting to tell a lot of my friends. I'm just now starting to really be okay and comfortable sharing with my community what I've been going through. And, it's been an eye-opener because you see the response. And yeah, this response has been great. But then you have those people who are like, okay, let's not talk about that. So, for myself, I know that I would love people to just get to know me as a person. I'm not my mental illness. I am not depression. I am not, bipolar. I am not that. I am Ramona. And I am, fun-loving just as you are. I am probably just as crazy or sane as the next person. So, we have to be able to live in that society where we are getting to know people for who they are. And, especially being a part of the law enforcement, you guys may have coworkers or like I said, even in your families or friends who are dealing with these things. We can't just shun them or shut them out because their minds operate differently. My mind operates a little differently. Every so often, I might just go into a shell where I just don't want to be talked to. I don't want to do anything. But as I've said before, I work. I've gone to school. I've done things. I've accomplished things, and that's who I am as a person. I try. So.
Are there resources that you wish were out there for you that are not, whether financial or other?
Financial, yes. However, being a part of Peachford and NAMI and also the Addiction and Recovery Center that I work with, I think that there are tons of resources. I'm even listening to you guys, and there are tons of resources out there for consumers such as myself, but we don't know about them. And because of the stigma, because it's so low key, some people, even some of my patients, would love to hear about these things. But again, I'm just now hearing about them, so I can only imagine a large percent of society does not know that these things are available. But I think there needs to be a better financial assistance in place for different consumers as well. Not sure what it is yet, but.
Okay, thank you. Well, speaking of that, I guess, Mr. Citron, since you work for the CSB, it might be ideal to address this too, but please, the other panelists do jump in too. But what sort of resources are provided by the CSB to consumers about whom Ms. Charles may have been referring?
Sure. So we're a comprehensive provider. So we've got a lot under our umbrella. And I always look at it, we are both a health and a human services organization. So we are a healthcare provider, and then we have to do lots lots of stuff that a human service organization has to do. So we will be confronted with folks who come into service delivery with us who may have some sort of mental health presentation, like a diagnosis of depression, and they may also have a housing issue. So a large part of our service continuum is we pursue funding for programming called supportive housing. So housing is part of our service delivery. So the health care in line with the mental health treatment, that the client with depression is seeing a psychiatrist and a therapist and also getting their antidepressants from us, as that's a component of our healthcare continuum. They also have housing issues because they are lower socioeconomic status, fewer financial resources. So we're confronted, they may have been homeless, and then we're confronted with having to find housing for them. We've got a stock of housing resources between Cobb and Douglas counties of like over 200 apartment units that we rent for people who were previously homeless who have a mental health problem. In addition to that, we have a supported employment program to help people, and we get funding for that, to help people who have been struggling stabilize first in regards to their psychiatric condition, and then if they need housing, we can hopefully address that. If they need assistance finding employment or employment stabilization, we can assist with that as well. So we're kind of a soup to nuts everything, and we've got everything, again, from some outpatient service delivery where an individual who's suffering, again, like with depression, can come and see a psychiatrist for medication management. We have a variety of different case management, like actually 4 different levels of case management. We interact very closely with the mental health court, and we provide what's called wraparound support, so people who are sick, they're getting their needs met and they're not slipping through the cracks with these wraparound supports. So we're unique that we are a healthcare entity, but we're also this wide array of human services. I have a fleet of 80 vehicles. We're in the transportation business de facto because our clients who don't have lots of resources, they need a ride to get to their treatment resources. So,
Well, let me unpack a little bit what you had mentioned. You said supportive employment. What exactly does that mean in the context of someone with a mental health condition?
sure. So someone, let's say they had been in the workforce, fallen out of the workforce, had a mental health problem, and then they want to get back into the workforce. So we can interface with like the Voc Rehab Agency, Department of Labor as resources. We can help them find employment and then also do what's called job coaching. So they have supports in place working with their employer to make sure that as they move back into the workforce, that they have the supports that they require managing their mental health issue, but that they can move towards independence and be successful in the work environment. So.
And how does the CSB get word out to consumers? Let's say they've never interfaced with the law enforcement community and they're just operating society just like a regular consumer would operate. How are they going to know where to go for CSB relief? How would they ever know about those things?
Sure. So we are a pretty well established community infrastructure organization. So we've been around for 30-something years. We have a call center that fields. It's open from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. That fields like 4,000 calls per month. So there's no shortage of folks who knock on our door, who find out word of mouth about us or through various community resources to have access to our services. The demand is tremendous, and we don't have enough resources to keep up with the need. That's why and we're a large state population-wise. Cobb County is a large suburban county. We have a large safety net population in need, and there's not enough resources. I always say we're kind of the worst funded of the worst, with a 48th per capita state funding for mental health services, and then we're in saturated dense population area of Cobb County. There's lots of people who should first come in for like outpatient services, and they fall through the cracks. So they ended up in the public park at 3 o'clock in the morning, or brought to you for an order to apprehend, and then they get pushed into possibly the criminal justice system, or they crash land in the emergency rooms. So.
Well, you referenced the interplay between you and Ms. Schwartz's office. How does that work? How do you interact with one another? How do you interface with one another through the different functions that you have within the system?
Well, typically, if somebody's charged with a felony offense and their defense attorney or their family member identifies that they have a mental health issue, then they can apply to our court. And as I said, then I screen the file and we refer it on to the team, and then we do really connect with the Community Services Board and we start using their services if the person becomes a participant. We use the intensive case management level of services for the people that are in our programs. So when they start out, they're usually going to treatment usually 4 times a week. We're making sure they're complying with their medication. We're drug testing them. We're also sending them to support groups in the community if they also have a substance abuse problem. They have to come to court once a week and interface with Judge Staley. So it's a very intense program. There's a lot to it. It's a voluntary program. They have to be competent to enter their plea, and they have to want to participate in treatment. And so the person's really got to recognize that they need the treatment. And sometimes just having that criminal offense hanging over their head is kind of the last motivator, I think, that makes them say, well, maybe I do need to give this a try. But just the time that I've spent working with our court, I think we're really getting a lot of bang for our buck in Cobb County, because we do have so many people that have come to the table and wanted to work together with it. The sheriff is sending 2 people, to our court, and the sheriff's paying their salary. The district attorney's paying my salary. We're using the grants that are available through the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. So I think we're trying to do it in the most cost-efficient way that we can. But the 2 big needs that I've seen so far, I do think we have a tremendous need for housing, and not just for people that are homeless or almost homeless, but we see people that have been living with family members for a long time. Maybe those family members are getting older, or maybe there's been some conflict in the family and that's not really an option. I would like to see more housing in our community for people that have mental illness. The other thing that I've noticed is I think it would be nice to have more funds for medication assistance. We've had some people in our program that they really weren't complying with their oral medication, and they weren't being consistent with it, or they didn't want to take it. We've seen a lot of success with injectable medications that they can do once a month, but they're very expensive. And without medication assistance, sometimes they can't use that medication.
What happens if you have a consumer who commits a misdemeanor and the family really, really, really wants them to go through the system, and the person says no, or they have a felony and they said, no, I don't want to do this, it's not for me, but the family tells you, I really, really want them to go through this? Right.
It's a voluntary program. So if they don't want to be in treatment and they don't want to participate, it's not going to work. If the person comes into the program and completes it and graduates, they can have a lesser sentence depending on their criminal background. Some people can walk away without a felony conviction, or some people can avoid prison time. But if they don't comply with everything and they're terminated from the program, then they're just sentenced like they would be in a typical case. So you really need a commitment on the front end from the person that they really want to get treatment instead of going through the traditional court system.
How many people have gone through the system so far in the history of the mental health court here in Cobb County?
Well, as I said, we just started in March of 2013, and we're at about 18 participants right now, and we have people being screened. We would like to get to about 25 because it is resource intensive. You can have somebody that's doing very well, and then they have to have an inpatient admission, and you kind of have to get that person back on track. So it is a lot of commitment to each participant in the program, but I think we're going to see a lot of long-term benefit from it.
And is there any restriction on the diagnosis of the person to use the services of the court?
Not really. As I said, we're looking for those people that are sort of in the middle. If somebody can just take care of their own needs with outpatient counseling, that's probably not the person that needs to be in our program. And if it's somebody that has to get their care at home through the ACT program, they're probably not going to be able to meet the requirements. So that ICM, intensive case management that they already had set up, that's sort of the people that we're targeting that we think we can be the most effective with in preventing future criminal behavior.
Okay. And it may be obvious to ask, but people have to have committed a crime of some kind in order to come before yourself.
That's right.
Okay, all right. So it's not like you're going out looking for people to
They
enroll.
would probably not want to be in our program if they weren't already in the criminal justice system.
Right, okay. Well, Lieutenant Westberg, you had obviously were with the Sheriff's Office, and you mentioned earlier the CIT classes that you're an instructor for. What does CIT stand for again?
CIT stands for Crisis Intervention Training. And basically what it is a class designed, it's a 40-hour class, and it's designed to educate law enforcement, public safety, 911 operators, you could be a firefighter, you could be a paramedic, just trying to get as many people possible trained and getting them on the brink of becoming more familiar when, in fact, they come into contact with a consumer. Before law enforcement arrives, a paramedic could be the first one on the scene. If a consumer's in the middle of a crisis, well, hopefully they've been through the class or have heard someone speak about the class, and they're a little more educated on, okay, well, they're in the middle of a crisis. That's a characteristics of maybe bipolar or PTSD, and become a little bit more educated and kind of, maybe have to stand back and wait. So that is the goal of the class, is to educate public safety. And my goal was to try to get as many Cobb County Sheriff's Office, because I'm the lieutenant over, Sheriff's Office training, but it is a 40-hour class, and, trying to get people in the class, it's going to deplete shifts, and of course it's going to make, the shifts short-handed. So we went with the major at North Central Georgia Law Enforcement Academy, and working with NAMI, we were able to open it up to have other agencies attend. And we've had a tremendous response throughout Cobb County. City of Kennesaw is on board, Kennesaw Police Department. We've had, they've basically, the chief there told me, every time you have a class, we're going to put 2 of my officers in there. The sheriff's office, we've had a class in, I believe it was late February, and we had, just from the sheriff's office alone, had 6 of our individuals there. And I have an upcoming class in June, and I have 8 coming. So the word is getting out there how great this class is, how much they've learned, being able to communicate with consumers and learn from them. How are we, as far as law enforcement goes, what can we learn from the consumer? What can we say that might help them to possibly calm them down some? And so it's been phenomenal.
Were you yourself a skeptic at one time about the wisdom of going through CIT?
I was. As I stated earlier, back in 2009, when I was a hostage negotiator, that was probably one of the requirements that they said, it probably would behoove you to go and take this class as a hostage negotiator. And at the time, I was assigned to the detention facility, and my going into this class, my thoughts were, I deal with crazy people all the time. They come into the jail in and out like revolving doors. There's nothing that nobody can tell me on how to deal with these people. I do it day in and day out. And so that was the attitude going in, and when I came out, it was a total 180-degree turn. Became more educated on what to look for. They are human beings. It's an illness, and it can attack anybody. And so it was an eye-opening experience. And then, of course, once you realize that, how do we communicate with them? And you realize that it is a team effort with the family members, with the resources that are out there. And if we can get family members through NAMI, if they realize that we have now a family member in our family who has a mental illness, but we're really not educated on how to deal with them. So if the family members can attend classes and go to utilize the resources that NAMI offers, it may assist that law enforcement officer if they have to go to the house because there's a crisis going on. And, just maybe go into another room or just step back and not really say anything, because it could be a conflict between the consumer and a family member, and, which could ultimately result in some sort of safety issue.
Is there the agency that offers CIT training? Do they charge Cobb County for that training?
What you talking about?
Do they
NAMI?
charge Cobb County for the
No,
training?
they do not. They do not charge Cobb County. NAMI's been very gracious in helping, utilizing the guest speakers, utilizing consumers, having individuals come in there and speak about it. They do not charge. Neil can really talk about that, but they do not charge Cobb County, and it's been a great benefit for law enforcement and public safety to attend the training.
So there really is such thing as a free lunch?
There really is such a thing as a free lunch, and that word has really gotten out.
Outside of the Sheriff's Department, where you obviously are working on behalf of the citizens of Cobb County, what other divisions of the public safety arena in Cobb County are currently trained in CIT at the present time?
I do know that Wellstar Cobb Hospital, they are sending their security officers to the CIT training. I know that this upcoming class that we're going to be conducting in June, I have a couple of Cobb firefighters coming. We're hoping that that will be our bridge into attracting 911 operators. The last class we had a civilian, I believe it was from Douglas County, that was in the class, and she was a civilian that really worked the front desk there in the headquarters of the Douglas County Sheriff's Office. And she said, I deal with individuals, consumers on a regular basis, coming in there upset, mad about a situation, mad about a case, whatever the situation. And she said, I just had no idea how to speak to them. Had no idea. So in Cobb County, I know that there are a few at Cobb County Police Department, not many. Cobb County Sheriff's Office, we're putting our people through the training. And of course, in Cobb County, Kennesaw Police Department is putting their people through training. And as I mentioned earlier, Wellstar, Cobb Hospital, Kennestone, Paulding. I know Paulding County outside of Cobb, but Paulding County and Douglas County are taking advantage of it as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Just, if you can just kind of take us through a scenario where, so if an officer is trained in CIT, they encounter a situation where 911's been called by a family member because they're having a conflict of some type with a consumer in the home, how is that going to be handled in a different manner because of the CIT training as opposed to an officer who has not had training or a firefighter who's not had training or EMS who's not had that CIT training?
I think if the officer knowing, if they have somewhat of an advanced knowledge of how the individual's acting, with the help of the 911 operator trying to retrieve as much information as possible, if they are CIT trained and they go on scene and they understand in advance that this is an individual who has a mental illness, and hopefully the family members are letting 911 know, letting the individuals know there's a situation here, this person has a mental illness, whether it be, advising them, hey, it's PTSD, bipolar, schizophrenic, whatever the situation may be. I think with the officers being educated, they can go in a different perspective. Of course, very promoting safety first on all parties, but, just hopefully taking the time to communicate with the consumer. Instead of going in and the consumer standing there screaming and yelling and carrying on and maybe, waving their arms and not listening to what the officer's saying. It'd be a different response. I think the officer would take more time in trying to calm the individual down and just spending a little more time talking to them, saying, hey, what's going on? Can you talk to me? What happened today? And it just gives them a little bit of a training that they can spend more time with the person. They may not have to go to jail. They may not need to go to jail. As mentioned earlier, it may just be altering the medication. It may just, take them to the resources that we have there and allow them to speak to somebody that can fix the medication. Or it could be just they've had a bad day at work and they're depressed. So they're, having an outburst with family. So whereas if somebody comes in that's not been through the CIT training, I think they would just respond to the outburst, respond to the screaming and yelling and carrying on, and probably, chances are, that individual would end up in custody.
Well, to that point, and so if the officer feels it's warranted to put the person in custody who has the mental health condition, how is that going to be handled at that point? Are they taken to jail? Are they then taken to some different diversion center or somewhere else in the county? How does it work?
It really kind of depends. I mean, officers, they can't sign 1013s. That has to come from the doctor and the judge, so forth. But law enforcement cannot initiate a 1013. They can take them to what they have observed in front of them, that individual displaying what kind of characteristics, what kind of situation that they've come upon, and they can actually take them to the hospital. But they have to explain to the doctor, this is what I observed. It's not merely on hearsay or anything of that nature. So hopefully they can get to the hospital and get some help. And again, it could be altering medication. If they are taken to jail, we do have mental health resources there at the Cobb County Detention Facility. And so they are able to talk to someone relatively quickly. All the inmates are screened prior to going to the housing area, so that hopefully, if they are in the middle of a crisis, hopefully at that point, by the time that they are screened medically, they can calm down some and hopefully be able to talk to the medical team there and be guided toward the right direction of being able to speak to the mental health facility, the mental health physician there at the jail.
And while the person is in custody, do they have access to their medications, access to their family, access to legal representation if they need it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But again, it's going to be if they're kind of calming down. If somebody's in a manic state, you know, you really kind of, and of course, we don't give narcotics at the jail by any means, so that's up to the medical staff on what medication is going to be distributed out. And again, them being able to, the consumer being able to make contact, yes, they are allowed to utilize phones. If they, you know, if attorney wants to come in and visit with them, as long as they're in a calm state, of course, that's going to be fine. We're not going to hold anybody back from meeting with their attorney or getting any medical treatment or anything of that nature.
And then how would they interface from you to Ms. Schwartz and what she does with the mental health court? How does that bridge get made?
She was probably going to have to, I'm going to have to defer to her for that. From my understanding, they're going to have to go in front of, I guess, a judge and request it. I'm not sure. I'll have to defer to her for that.
That's correct. I mean, I think somebody's going to have to make contact with us to let them know they're a good candidate, and sometimes that's the defense attorney when they go out to speak with somebody. Of course, if they're having a hard time communicating with their client and the person doesn't really seem to understand the process they're involved in, sometimes we have to stop for a minute and the judge orders an evaluation just to determine if they're competent and if they understand the legal proceedings that are going on. Once we get past that stage, sometimes an attorney, I think our circuit defender probably has a certain group of attorneys that he feels like are more sensitive to mental illness issues, and he probably kind of assigns those cases a little bit to those attorneys that can spot the issues, and they will apply to the court. Sometimes I get calls from family members, though, you know, a relative, and they kind of they ask questions about our court and how it works, and then they take that information back to the attorney, and then the application is made. But as I said, it's been a real valuable resource. One of our team members is Gary Gregg, who works for the Cobb Community Services Board, and he is at our weekly meetings. So he has a lot of familiarity with how they've been treated in the jail, what medications they might be on, what diagnosis they have they cooperated in the jail. And we also have a sheriff's deputy assigned to our team, and that deputy will tell us they have not been cooperative in the jail or maybe they were violent towards one of the jailers. So it gives us a good picture, I think, of the person as a whole. And then having gone out and interviewed the person, we also ask for references. So we talk to family members and people that know them better. And, you know, sometimes we find out that they have been employed and they have had good long periods where they didn't have any issues with the law. A lot of times when you're reading an incident report, right there in the report it will say they were off their medication or they've had previous psychiatric problems. And it is nice, I do read some incident reports that say the police officer was familiar with this person and knew that they had psychiatric issues and had been able to calm them down in the past. But in this particular case, that didn't happen.
Okay. Mr. Citron?
Yeah, so let me mention, because my organization is kind of interwoven with all these situations. So we employ under contract with the county. We are a subspecialty provider of mental health services in the jail. So Wellstar Health Systems is the medical provider of health services in the Cobb County Jail, and then they sub the mental health services to us. And she had mentioned Gary Gregg. Gary's an employee of mine. He's our jail coordinator. We have 8 full-time staff clinicians in the Cobb County Jail, including a full-time psychiatrist, and we're hiring 2 full-time psychiatric nurse practitioners to deal with the medication management issues, okay? On any given day of the week, we're managing 400 inmates who have psychiatric problems. So it's a lot of symptom management with medicine. We had talked about the experience when someone is in the community, kind of pre-arrest or arrest, and this new center we're building, we're really hoping kind of revolutionizes some of these processes, because law enforcement will have some discretion when they pick up based upon the symptom that someone's showing. And we've got, because there's a dearth of services in our community, we just have too many people who have mental health problems as a manifestation of their illness who offend and then end up incarcerated. Or they end up getting taken to the emergency room, and then law enforcement spends hours up in the emergency room having to wait in the ER with someone to go through the clearance process who has a psychiatric issue. So this new center we're building, this 20,000 square foot facility on County Services Parkway, and it's modeled after a couple of different treatment locations. We sent a delegation down to Orlando and Tampa to study their behavioral health crisis service centers there, and we just sent a delegation that was spearheaded by one of my folks down to San Antonio to visit the Restoration Center. And it's kind of this great partnership of the mental health community with the law enforcement community, the local judicial community in San Antonio, around getting folks who have mental health problems, who don't end up in jail, so you can get them diverted into a better place for them to start like a treatment episode. So this 20,000 square foot facility we're building, where there is a sally port for law enforcement to drop off. And we're building it so that law enforcement can come in and out in 5 to 10 minutes. So that's a customer service issue. So we want law enforcement to come visit us versus go spend 4 hours in the Wellstar emergency room with a psychiatric client. They'd rather get back on the road and drop off with us. So, but those were lessons we learned from other treatment providers in other states about their best practice to work with law enforcement to use their center versus, someone wakes up, law enforcement picks someone up across the street in the public park at 3 o'clock in the morning who's off their medications, and then they go to jail. And no one feels good about that. They feel good if there's like, well, you're starting a treatment episode versus at a cost to the taxpayer, someone gets incarcerated because they were homeless and off their medicine. So,
All right, thank you.
yeah.
Now, Judge Wolk, I'm sure some of our listening audience might say, that judge seems like a very nice jurist up there, but I didn't hear any discussion about wills or marriages. So how does probate fit into all this mental health discussion?
I very incorrectly, I'm going to use a word your friends don't like. I say, for lack of a better way of describing what I do dead people and crazy people law. So half of my job, probably 75% of my judicial time, is spent in a courtroom hearing guardianships, many of which are related to mental illness. And I don't actually know the answer to this question. Is dementia considered a mental illness? And that to me is just fascinating because, people say, oh, you don't want to talk about bipolar, you don't want to talk about depression, you don't want to talk about some of these things, but grandma has dementia, and that's just normal. That's not, mental illness. But we see an immense number. We're doing 5 to 10 guardianships a week these days. And many of them are 20-something-year-olds who have a break. And they were students in college, and all of a sudden they're not even bathing, and they're laying in the exact same spot in the floor for 3 weeks, and nobody knows if they've eaten anything in 3 weeks. And they were an A student, and you see these breaks. The other thing that we do that's very focused is, and you've heard it mentioned a couple of different ways, I think it's been called an OTA, a 1013. Those are the initial processes that get someone to an involuntary treatment, and that's one of my jobs, along with cattle brands. But one of the things that we do is, if you have a person in crisis, and if law enforcement is called, and the person, and this is a very important part of the law, is if law enforcement is called and the person is committing a penal offense, law enforcement can take them into custody. They need not arrest them, but they have to be committing an offense in order to be picked up and transported. Absent the penal offense, which generally you can find they're jaywalking or they're threatening somebody or something, and you'll find law enforcement trying to find something in order to take them into custody in order to transport them for psychiatric care. If they're just not doing that, then we get into a situation where we've actually had law enforcement officers come to my office and swear out affidavits because they've observed this person acting in such a way that is an imminent threat to themselves or others. Writing in blood on the basement walls because they're in a manic condition. But cutting yourself and writing on your own walls, no matter how odd that is, you can do that all day long without being criminal. And so law enforcement can't then pick you up. So 2 individuals can come to our office who have observed the behavior. That's the word in the code. Who have observed the behavior within the past 48 hours. And they have to prove through those affidavits, we don't have a hearing, we don't do anything else. They have to be able to articulate, which is a very big challenge for some of these people's families who may not be literate, who may not be eloquent, who may not be English speakers, but that's the way that we have to do it under the law, is that they have to be able to show that this person is an imminent threat to themselves or others. So we have people who are doing these things, not eating, doing all kinds of behaviors. Sometimes we had a woman who bought 7 boats in a weekend. A couple of years ago, she bought like $1,000 worth of purses, and the next week she tried to kill herself. The year before that, she spent I don't know how much money on shoes. The next week she tried to kill herself. Her family came in and said, she always does this manic spending and then she tries to kill herself. On its face, buying 7 boats isn't a imminent threat to herself or others, but there's a pattern there. And so we had her evaluated. And people think that I'm committing somebody when I sign these orders. What I'm actually doing is signing an armed taxi ride to get them in front of a medical provider, because the decision to make a commitment on an involuntary basis is a medical decision. But if someone's sitting in their basement cutting on themselves and writing on the walls, they're not in front of a doctor to make that decision. So we just effectively get them out of whatever environment they're in, that they're harming themselves or others, and get them in front of that doctor who can say, you seem fine to me, you can go home, your family's overblowing the situation, or obviously there's some kind of a situation we're going to keep you for a period of time.
With a guardianship, can the person be made to take medicine, made to go to a psychiatrist, made to go to group therapy?
No. And I love the optimism of this panel, and we are making some very significant strides. I tend to see, and not that everybody here doesn't see people in crisis, but when you do OTAs, I see, we call them the frequent flyers. Mm-hmm. We see the people who come in and they say, my son is wheelchair bound. He lives off of the square. He is off of his meds again. He's in the middle of the street, yelling at cars driving by. Can you go pick him up? This is a 21-day cycle with this person. So he goes in, he gets medicated, he gets out, he won't take his meds. We can't force injectables on him. So he gets the injectables at the beginning of the cycle. By 21 days, it's wearing off. He's not taking his oral medication. It's foreseeable, but there's nothing that we can do about it at this point in time because there's no insurance, and so he's going to get released, and I can almost guarantee and we have families that come in and they're like, why can't you just make him stay? And I tell them, it's not, first of all, I'm not putting them in the hospital in the first place. Secondly, it's not my decision to keep them there. Until the hospital it's about 5 days, the hospital has to file a petition to keep somebody on an involuntary basis. Then we go out and we hear a case. It's just like a courtroom. We just move everybody to the hospital. And we hear evidence as to the continuing need to keep somebody in for a period for 6 months or potentially longer. But that is for involuntary treatment on an inpatient basis. But that's the hospital's decision. Again, all of these involuntary treatments are medical decisions. So no matter how desperate the family may be, because they see that someone is better enough to be discharged, but nowhere near well enough to function for more than a few days, if someone is good enough at some of the facilities, and we have some fantastic mental health facilities in Cobb County. I have to give, there's nowhere else I would want to live in Georgia than Cobb County for some of the resources that we have available, both with the sheriff's office and law enforcement, with the CSB, with the options through the DA's. I can't say enough about our community. As imperfect as it is, it really tries. But it is immensely frustrating to these families who go through this cycle over and over and over again, and they don't see any end in sight to these discharges and these decompensations over and over again.
Well, that brings up a great point, because you got Ms. Blake there right next to you, who's a family member of someone who has a mental health condition.
Yeah, and you know, not everybody with a mental health condition ends up in sheriff's custody or in jail or in front of the probate court. You know, a lot of most of the mental illnesses hit either in teenage or young adult years when the person is still covered under their family's insurance policy. And you can get them in the hospital, and that is a acute care sort of facility. You know, 5 to 7 days is usually it, and then they're discharged. If you have the private insurance, you might be able to get a step-down facility. We've got some good ones in the Atlanta area. They are cost prohibitive. And, you know, it's if you had a heart attack, you would be in coronary care or ICU, and you would be in that acute care setting for 7 days or whatever, and then you'd probably move to a floor on the hospital, which is a step-down unit. And then if you're still, you're short of breath and you're still having all the symptoms of your heart attack, you're going to go to a rehab facility. That doesn't exist in the mental health world, at least not for people who don't find themselves either, eligible for the government assistance or or in the prison, law enforcement. So it's a hard situation for the family members to have the frequent flyers, the ones who are in the hospital and they're discharged. Well, they can't keep them safe at home, and they attempt suicide again, and then they're right back, doing the cycle again. The families go broke, and there is a mortality to mental illness. Suicide is real. And we have a shortage of inpatient beds to start with, and the cost is awful.
So what are those costs? Just so people, because people in the audience may have no idea when you say cost prohibitive, they might be thinking $500. I mean,
well, if your insurance will cover the inpatient stay, that's wonderful. But if not, it can be $1,000 a day. The residential facilities generally run $20,000 a month. Most people just don't have that kind of money under the mattress. And yet, it takes a long period of time to heal from a mental health condition. You need a quiet place, a therapeutic environment, you need the medicines, you need the supports. And you don't get that on the streets or even in your home if you're living with your family, because if you're unstable, you get ramped up and they go attempt suicide. I mean, we slept with car keys under the pillows and knives locked in a safe, and still there were suicide attempts over and over.
as a family member of someone who has a mental health condition, how does your life different as you interact with your coworkers, your family, your neighbors? How does life differ for you?
It's a very isolating sort of illness because, one, you've got the person's privacy to consider. You really don't want to necessarily talk about it, and yet if the diagnosis was cancer, you'd probably be saying, to your coworkers and your neighbors, my son just was diagnosed with cancer, and they'd be bringing you casseroles. Well, we call this the no casserole illness because, nobody gets casserole, and my son has given permission to tell his story. He says it helps people and it's very healing. So it's okay to tell his story, but a lot of people are very sensitive about that, and you don't want to do that. There's discrimination against, renting to people with mental illnesses, against jobs don't want to hire somebody if they know you had a psychiatric hospitalization. It's a questionnaire on the employment application. So, you may not even be able to get the job. So it's difficult as a family member, and I think that's one of the wonderful things about NAMI. We have education classes as well as support groups, and support groups here in Cobb County, we meet every single week. Every single Monday, we have a support group for family members, and right across the hall, we have a free support group for individuals with a mental health diagnosis. And so that for an hour and a half, they get peer support. The family members support group is facilitated by a family member who's lived with mental illness in the family, and the consumer support group is facilitated by someone who's living in recovery from a mental illness. So those are free. The education programs are free. And there's nothing like talking with somebody who has been through it. You know, it may not change the situation, but that support is invaluable.
Is NAMI something that's only found in Cobb County, Georgia?
Oh, no, there are like 1,400 affiliates across the United States. The NAMI website, NAMI.org, will have every state listed, and then you can just find the closest NAMI support group to you or the closest education class.
The comparison has been made several times tonight between a condition like cancer and then mental illness. Obviously, with cancer, there exists the possibility that you might get radiology or have chemotherapy, radiation, and then you go into remission and you're fine for the rest of your life. Does mental illness work the same way?
Well, mental illness is relapsing and cyclical. So sometimes you can be in remission for the entire life. But it takes work, to stay in recovery. But more often than not, it's a cycle. It's up and down, and the roller coaster continues.
So it's not like after a few pills and a couple of therapy sessions, poof, you're magically better?
I sure thought that the first time around, and that was, that little bubble got burst real fast. I thought, first hospitalization, we'd get him back home, and life would be the same. He'd be like he used to be. But no, it's taken, he's had a diagnosis for about 20 years. He's 26 now, and he is doing very, very well, but he works at it every day.
What is something, if you had people that you want to advise out there that know someone who is related to a person with a mental health condition, what is it you want them to say to you? How do you want them to interact with you or treat you that would be helpful to you?
You mean if I was advising another family member?
Right, exactly. That you're not that you talked about this isolation feeling.
Right.
What how do you remedy that besides the support groups you mentioned?
I think connecting with resources is real important, and NAMI's really good with that. I mean, everybody's heard of Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and NAMI's kind of like that. The NAMI mommies all kind of work together and support each other. We have a network that let people know what the resources are, let them know about what the CSB offers. Let them know about guardianship if that's necessary. Let them know about CIT officers. So that's important. I think what I would say is is HOPE. And the acronym for HOPE is Hold On, Pain Ends. If you can just hold on, it does get better. It may not go away. It's a chronic illness, but it will get better. And I think that's so important to know that.
I know that people often know about the breast cancer pink ribbon. Is there a similar thing for NAMI and mental illness?
There is, but it's a well-kept secret. There's a green ribbon, for mental health awareness, and May is Mental Health Month, and NAMI's starting some pretty good publicity campaigns coming up, so hopefully people will become aware of it, and that green ribbon, they'll see it and expect recovery, because it does happen.
And how does NAMI interface with parts of Cobb County? I mean, I think there's been some allusions to that earlier tonight. How do you exactly work with law enforcement, with the courts, with CSB?
Well, NAMI's a partner for the CIT program. It's NAMI and the Department of Behavioral Health and Disability, and also the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. I think they're the funders. The DBHDD and the GBI are the funders. So we work together. We refer people to the mental health court. We refer people to the probate court. We refer people to the CSBs for treatment. So to access services, and so we're partners with everybody. I mean, we're all up here together.
Okay. And just so people know, how often does NAMI meet again?
The NAMI support groups are every single Monday at the First Presbyterian Church. It's not a faith-based support group. It's just they give us free meeting space, so we like free. So every Monday from 7 to 8:30 p.m. at First Presbyterian Church, unless it's a holiday. On the third Thursday of every month, we have a free speaker series with different topics. We've had Judge Staley has been a speaker, Lieutenant Westenberger's been a speaker. We've had in our own voice presenters like Ramona, so a variety of different education topics. And then we have courses too that are offered periodically that are 12-week courses for both consumers and family members.
Well, that's a good transition to Ms. Charles here. You've obviously had a chance to sit and listen to some of the commentary that's been offered. Do you have any kind of other thoughts you'd like to share with our listening and viewing audience?
No, I really can appreciate all that I've heard, especially with, the CIT trained officers. I do tell my patients now, and their families as well, because they always ask me, well, my family member just went through such and such a crisis, and the police officer that came didn't know what to do. So I always tell them now, listen, if you call or are in this situation, ask for a CIT trained officer. And they're like, wait, what is that? And so I have to, let them know. So it is great that you guys are educating the community about the processes and about the different resources that you guys provide. And for people who are dealing with the situations who don't want to speak up, I really encourage people to get the help that they need, get the assistance that they need for whatever it is that's going on. Sometimes the mental health conditions could be temporary. People go through processes of grieving, so that may lead to depression. It may be something where, they may live with it for years. I'm just now, like I said, I'm just being diagnosed 7 years ago. But regardless of if it's a short time or if it's long term, I really encourage people to get the help and support that they need. And, continue to, look up the county representatives such as you guys so that they can get tapped into those resources. So yeah, and Fulton County, well actually I'm with DeKalb County, and we have pretty good hospitals there too. Fulton County, I do like I said, I do NAMI Northside, and our support groups have been very efficient for our community as well. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I certainly could go on for quite a bit longer. This has been a wonderful, wonderful topic to discuss and a great panelist. But unfortunately, I think our time has drawn nigh. And but I did want to thank our viewing audience here as well as the live audience. And for those folks who don't know, you can also look at this particular broadcast at a later time. It'll be uploaded to the website for the county, which will be another way to view this information. But I want to thank Ms. Schwartz, Mr. Citron, Judge Wolk, Ms. Blake, Lieutenant Westenberger, and of course Ms. Charles. You each are wonderful in your own way, and you contribute so much to our understanding of mental health. And I know that each one of you is doing great things in this arena, and we're a much better county because of each of the things you're doing tonight. And so we thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom and life experience with us. And with that, I will turn the microphone over to Trish.
Thank you. We especially want to thank our dynamic panel members and moderator this evening. We are honored to have each of you as our moderator and panel members this evening. Our community is very fortunate to have each of you educating the community concerning mental health issues. We commend you for your daily dedication to support, to provide care, services, assist with legal issues, and programs for the citizens of Cobb and their families who are experiencing mental health issues. You are appreciated, and we thank you for your daily service to recognize and assist individuals with mental health issues. A special thank you to Cornelius for broadcasting this discussion on Channel TV 23 this evening. Thank you for joining us this evening. We invite you to watch all of our 2014 and 2015 panel discussions on the Cobb Government TV 23 website or the link from the Neighborhood Safety Commission website. We wish each of you an enjoyable, and hopefully you can find some relaxing time this summer to enjoy yourself. Please join us in September when we will resume our monthly panel discussions. Thank you again. Your members were wonderful tonight. We truly appreciate you giving up your evening for us this evening. Thank you so much. Thank you, Joel. You're a wonderful moderator, and good night.